Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing John Scalzi's novel, The Collapsing Empire. Talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. John Scalzi is a contemporary science fiction author. He's still probably best known for Old Man's War, which was a series of books that he started, I believe, in the mid to late aughts. That was pretty well renowned. He won a Hugo Award in 2013 for Red Shirts, and he's also written, it's basically a medical thriller called Lock In that I read that was pretty good. This book, The Collapsing Empire, is the first book in a trilogy. All three books have been published, so if you like this book, you don't have to wait for the other two that have already been released. But these three books are unrelated to anything else as far as my understanding that he's done before. Collapsing Empire is a space opera. The plot is a little confusing. I'll try my best to give you broad strokes of it without spoiling it. It's essentially set in a world 1,000 years from now where humans have spread throughout the galaxy through faster than light travel that is enabled by something called the flow, which is a naturally occurring, basically on-off ramps that humans are able to utilize to move quickly through space. And in this world, there is a character called the Emperor X, which is his gender-neutral term for emperor, who has his house has a monopoly on space travel and weapon systems. And essentially, it's a galactic fiefdom with them at the top. There is also a kind of a galactic church, and there's also guilds and other houses that have monopolies on various things who are all vying for power. It's really hard to talk about the book and not point to Dune. So I'll be pointing to Dune in a little bit here, but the basic plot of this novel is there is a system, there is something that is endangering the flow, and there is concern that the flow, which has been working for 1,000 years, basically unbroken, is starting to become imperiled, and several characters are working together to try to determine what is happening and what can be done to maybe, if not stop that from happening, at least mitigate it. At the same time, there is a new Emperor X, and there are several assassination attempts on her life. So there's the political intrigue of what's happening with her and who's taking actions against her and why. So that's basically the plot of the book. I liked the prologue chapter. The Scalzi kind of throws you right into the action. There's a space mutiny that is happening, and I thought the first chapter does a really good job of explaining some things about the universe, explaining the flow, explaining what happens with the rules of the flow and what happens if you go out of the flow, as well as having, I thought, pretty interesting characters, and it's just a really fun, fast action set piece. Also, to some degree, sets the tone of the world, which I'll get back to in a little bit as well, so I thought that was all really well done. The character of the Emperor X, there's a character called Cardinia. Cardinia becomes the Emperor X after her father passes away due to natural causes at the beginning of the novel. And her story is basically taking over the role as a reluctant ruler and learning to rule in that place of something where she wasn't expected to take over. Her brother was going to take over. Unfortunately, he passes away, and she has to take over for him, and her reluctance in kind of growing into that role. So John Scalzi has pointed to The Goblin Emperor, which is a book I've reviewed for the channel. I'll leave a link to that below, as well as his Tor article where he talks about influences for this novel as an influence for this character, and you can see that. I think that this character, more than really any other characters, has a depth to her where she does have a character arc, and you feel some sympathy for her as she's going through this trial and tribulation. I also think that there are some comments on climate change in the book that I think he handles pretty deftly. I think he hits you over the head at least once with the analogy, but only once. It's there if you want it. It's not there if you really don't want to look too deeply into it. But I thought that was definitely, in his use of language there, I think is really interesting when talking about the political troubles that come from interruptions of the flow and how we may see our current political situation in comparison to that. I thought that was interesting. So what didn't I like about the book? I think it's hard to talk about this book and not talk about Dune. In some ways, it does feel like John Scalzi likes some of the things about Dune. Likes this political system, this political intrigue, assassination attempts, different houses vying for control. So he liked those things, and he didn't like the exposition of Frank Herbert's book, which is basically the first 200 pages of Dune, where he's establishing the world and establishing the rules of the universe. So he's like, we're going to take all that out. And I think he does that to his detriment in some ways, because I think there's rules of the world that aren't really established, that are kind of dripped in throughout. And because they're dripped in throughout, you have questions like, well, why is this the way it is? This feels like a contrivance because you don't really explain this earlier in the book. So I found myself doing that a couple times, and some of that stuff I can forgive. I think that my bigger issue with the book wasn't so much the plot. I think the plot is fine for what it is. It's convoluted, but in a space opera, it's going to be kind of a convoluted plot because you have different machinations of characters. So I really wasn't as bothered by that. My bigger problem was the characters in the book feel very flat to me, and I mean that in the sense that I don't know what any of the characters want, and they feel like they're just doing things because it's expected of them to do this thing in this world. So for instance, there are a couple characters who are just really, their character traits are they're very ambitious and they're ruthless characters. And I think that's fine if you understand what the point of them being ruthless and ambitious is. And there were some times where I was like, you have a chance to give this character some depth and you don't, and I don't really understand why. And this is the first book in a trilogy, so I'll give that caveat, so things may change in later books. But there's a character specifically who is very ruthless and is ambitious, and we learn that her mother is very much the same way. And so you're like, well, maybe there's this character conflict where she can't ever live up to her mother because she's always in her mother's shadow, and she just feels that she has to be like her mother, but more so in order to gain her respect. And quickly that kind of dissipates, and there's no real conflict there, and they're just both kind of repulsive and frustrating characters. And I thought that there were points in time where he could have done things that were interesting with the characters and just every time failed to do it. And that was frustrating. There's a character specifically, that same character, who just uses a stream of profanity. And I think he even calls it out in the book where he knows that he's using a stream of profanity, and that may be off-putting to some people. You know, I'm not really super sensitive to profanity myself. I don't mind it. Even I felt it was a little over the top, and I felt like he was using it as a crutch to where it's like, well, we could do something interesting with this character, but she's going to now be known as the character who just curses a lot, instead of, like I said, trying to find things about her character of like, well, what does this character want, and why can't the character get it, and what's going on with them, and what is their whole reason for being in this universe. And so that to me was frustrating. There are some characters who are introduced, and you're like, okay, I think I understand this character, and then the character will go on and do something that makes no sense for the character to do. There's a character in specific who is like told to be secret about something and not tell anybody. And we're kind of introduced to this character as being a competent, intelligent person. And within what feels like 5 minutes, they kind of give up the goods. And you're like, I don't think that they would have done this first thing that you said that they would have done. And I certainly don't think they would have done the second thing. And that felt a little bit frustrating to me at times. And so that to me were the main problems with the book. Like I said, the plot is fine for what it is. It's a little convoluted, and there are some moving parts to it, but overall, I think it's okay. To me, the bigger issue is I just felt like the characters were flat and uninteresting, other than maybe Cardinia. And the biggest frustration to me was, you know, John Scalzi, I've read enough of his stuff to know what he can do, and I felt like for this book, there are some interesting concepts in the book. There is, every Emperor X has something that's essentially a neural implant that allows them to access a special room, that allows them to retrieve the memories of every past Emperor X, which is a cool idea. So they have basically the memories of Emperor X's going back 1,000 years. So Cardinia, as a new Emperor X, goes in and consults past Emperor X's to gain their knowledge of things. And I thought that was cool. There's a little bit of a twist, which doesn't work fully as a twist because the foundation for it being a twist isn't laid particularly well. In this universe, we really only focus on noble characters. And by that, I mean people who are in a fiefdom system, people who have titles. So we don't really get into the heads of really workers and seeing how workers are treated. It's kind of implied that they're not particularly treated well, but we don't really know that. We don't go into like their education system that lays the foundation for this system. We don't really go into that. And so some of these things I think that he feels are like revelations are kind of undercut because he doesn't want to lay the foundation, in my opinion, in the beginning. So that to me, again, was frustrating. So I think he does have some ideas. I think the memory room was a cool idea, but to me, the frustrating part, along with the flat characters and the lack of kind of laying foundation for some of these things, was it felt like you're going to do Dune. Okay, you're going to do Dune, so you're going to bring a bunch of like new cool ideas to this thing that's, you know, at this point almost 60 years old. I wish he had brought more ideas, because I know that he can do it, because I've seen him do it before, and just it felt, I don't want to say there was half of an effort there, but I felt he could have done better and brought more new and weird and different to this, and I just felt like it felt samey, same old, and doesn't really shake anything up. And I think for him, shaking things up was, well, I'm going to give traditional roles that were traditionally the men's role. Like, I'm going to make a character who's like the Baron Harkonnen, but I'm going to make her a female, and it's going to blow your mind. And it didn't blow my mind. And also, he has a problem where there are characters who he wants to put forward as competent characters, and they just do stupid things. It's, again, feels like it undercuts the character and doesn't really give them the depth that I think they need. And so I would have liked to have seen him slow down a little bit, even if he had another 50 pages of foundation for some of these things, even if they were chapters that were intercut with this to make the world feel fuller and to make some of those things that should feel like the rug has been pulled out from under me and everything has changed. That would have been cool with that. I just felt like for someone who is such a skilled writer, I was expecting a little bit more, because I've seen him do more in the past. So overall, I was disappointed. Now, it's the first book in a series. It could be that the second and third books are much better. If someone asked me, where do you think the book is going, I could make an educated guess, and those books don't really particularly interest me. So I would actually be interested if other people have read this trilogy and where they feel the first book fits in. But to me, those were my problems with it. I think if you are someone who loves sci-fi and just reads anything that's sci-fi, you'll like this book. If you're someone who was like, I've read Dune, but the language is just really hard for me to get over, and I think there's too much exposition, I think there's too much world building, then you may actually like this, depending on how much you can tolerate profanity, because there's like a character, like I said, who there's a lot of profanity, and some people will be happy with that character, and other people, like myself, will be more like, I want this character as far away from me as possible, because it is so over the top and grating, in my opinion. So that is The Collapsing Empire by John Scalzi. If you have read this book or the other two books that follow up, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Don't spoil it for anybody, but I would like to see other people's thoughts on it. Because like I said, I am generally a fan of John Scalzi. This one just didn't hit for me. And next time I'm going to be reading Gold Diggers by Sanjina Sathian. Until next time, please leave a comment section in the comment section below if you have read it, your thoughts on The Collapsing Empire. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. And if you enjoyed this, please like the video. Until next time, bye.